the man who needed the whole world. Picture this. You're 9 years old. You board a ship to a foreign country. You don't speak the language. You have no money. Your name is so strange that kids will laugh at it from day one. And the mother who sees you off at the dock, she doesn't cry. She just watches until the ship disappears. That boy will own half of Europe in 20 years. But first, the island. Where he came from. Corsica is a chunk of mountain rock in the Mediterranean Sea that the rest of the world kept forgetting existed. The cliffs were so steep that shepherds walked sideways. Villages clung to the rocks like they were holding on for dear life. People there lived by one simple code. Family is everything, and insults get answered in blood. No government, no king ever really mattered to them. The island belonged to Genoa first. Then France bought it, the way you buy furniture without asking the furniture how it feels. On August 15th, 1769, Napoleon Bonaparte was born there. His mother, Letizia, was on her way back from church and simply didn't make it to the bed in time. The baby came so fast, the midwife barely caught him. That was his first rush, not his last. The family was minor nobility, just barely. They had a title but no estate to go with it. His father was a lawyer, smart, bookish, the kind of man who read aloud in the evenings. His mother was a completely different story. Letizia was made of something harder than most people. She never cried in public. She disciplined her children without hesitation and without guilt. Later, when her son became emperor, and she lived in a palace with servants and carriages, she still kept money hidden away for a rainy day. Because she knew the rainy day always comes. 8 children were born, 5 survived. Napoleon was the second, and that bothered him from the start. His older brother Joseph got to go first everywhere, just because he showed up earlier. Worth noting, Napoleon later made Joseph king of Spain. Not a bad way to settle the score. The house in Ajaccio was cramped. It smelled of olive oil, wood, and his father's books. In the evenings, his father read aloud. Plutarch, stories of great commanders. Little Napoleon lay on the floor at his feet and listened with a stillness he never had at any other moment in his life. One evening, Napoleon was about 6. His father finished the story of Hannibal, how he crossed the Alps with elephants, crushed Rome in several battles, and still lost the war. Napoleon sat quietly for a moment, then asked, "So it wasn't the general who failed, it was the people behind him?" His father had no answer. Out on the streets, that quiet boy became someone else entirely. The kids of Ajaccio played rough. Gangs, thrown rocks, fistfights over alleyways that were worth nothing except pride. Napoleon always took the side of whoever was losing, not out of sympathy, just because leading the underdog to victory is more interesting. He had one strange habit. He'd go down to the shore, where the cliffs dropped straight into the water, and stare at the horizon for hours, alone. No reason anyone could see. Maybe he was already seeing something out there that nobody else could. The outsider. In 1778, when Napoleon was 9, his father pulled off something extraordinary, a royal scholarship to study in France. Military school, education, a career. His mother walked him to the dock. She held him for 1 second and let go. "Study hard enough that I never have to be ashamed of you." He looked back from the gangway. She stood there, small, straight, hands folded. He never forgot that image. He was 9 years old. He didn't speak a word of French. The military school at Brienne greeted him with gray walls, the smell of chalk, and boys from wealthy French families who made it clear from day one, "You don't belong here." His name got turned into a crude nickname. His accent got mocked constantly. He had no spending money at all. While the other boys bought sweets, he waited. He didn't cry. He watched. And he very quickly figured out who was actually worth something, who was dangerous, who was a coward, who was a real leader, and who was just loud. That ability to read people in minutes never left him. In the first few months, a group of older boys cornered him in a hallway and started pushing him around. Napoleon hit the first one so fast and so precisely that the kid sat down on the floor looking genuinely confused. The others froze. Nobody cornered him in dark hallways after that. He learned French in a year, with an accent that never went away, but well enough to argue. And he loved to argue. Math came to him so naturally, it was like he thought in numbers. History he devoured. His favorite figures were Caesar and Alexander the Great, not because they won, but because they thought faster than everyone else. There was one moment everyone remembered: the first snowfall. Corsica never gets snow. So when it fell in November 1778, Napoleon walked outside, scooped up a handful, and stared at it melting in his palm. Then he thought for about 10 minutes. Then he organized a snowball fight, his first military operation. He split everyone into 2 squads, assigned positions, and had them build a snow wall the night before. The teachers watched with their mouths open. The kid they'd been laughing at a month ago was commanding 30 boys, and they were actually listening. He won. Obviously. At 15, he was transferred to the elite military school in Paris, which trained officers for the Royal Army. Even richer, even more arrogant, even more people born into connections he'd never have. He was an outsider again. In 1785, at 16 years old, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the artillery. One of the examiners wrote in his file, "Ambitious, a loner. If circumstances allow, will go far." Circumstances would allow. The country burns. He watches. By the late 1780s, France was a powder keg with a missing candle. Peasants were starving. The treasury was empty. The nobility refused to pay taxes. The king was a decent man who simply had no idea what was happening in his own country. And then in the summer of 1789, it exploded. Napoleon was stationed in the provinces at the time. Small garrison, dull post, a salary that barely covered bread. He lived in rented rooms and read everything he could get his hands on: philosophy, military theory, history. He filled notebooks with observations about people, commanders, and how power actually works. When the news of the Bastille reached him, he wrote one line: "The people have shown they are capable of anything. The question is what they'll do with that." Not excitement, not panic, a cold question. The revolution rolled on, heads fell, factions rose and collapsed, and Napoleon watched it all like a scientist studying a chemical reaction. Liberty, equality, fraternity, beautiful words. But who's in command? Who's accountable? Who makes the call when everything is on fire? Very few people were asking those questions. Toulon, the first move. The port city of Toulon had switched sides to the Royalists and let the British fleet sail in. Republican forces had been besieging it for months and gotten nowhere. The artillery commander was so incompetent, he'd placed his cannons in positions where they literally couldn't hit anything. Then a young captain arrived with orders to take command of the artillery. He asked for a map, locked himself in a room with it for 2 hours, alone. Then he came out and told them where the batteries needed to go. The generals listened with barely concealed contempt. This captain was 24, spoke with an accent, and who did he think he was? But his logic was so obvious there was nothing to argue with. Put batteries on the hill, you control the harbor entrance. No harbor, no fleet. No fleet, no Toulon. Simple. A few weeks later, the British fleet left. Toulon fell. A member of the government wrote to Paris, "This young officer is a man of extraordinary ability. Take notice of him." Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general. He was 24 years old. Josephine. Between the wars, there was a woman. Josephine was a widow, 32 years old, 2 kids from her first marriage, a mountain of debt, and the reputation of being the most elegant woman in Paris. She could do things Napoleon simply couldn't. Walk into a room and make everyone look up. Talk to people so that each one felt like the most important person there. Laugh at exactly the right moment. She was Paris, everything he wasn't and probably never would be. He fell hard, immediately, almost embarrassingly so, for a man who prided himself on controlling everything. The letters he wrote her from the front are some of the strangest love letters in history. No charm, no flattery, just obsession. I wake up, I think of you. I fall asleep, I think of you. You're getting in the way of my work. It's unbearable. Josephine, what have you done to me? She'd read them, smile, and carry on with her life in Paris exactly as before. She wasn't in love with him, possibly never was, but she understood his rise and she valued it. They married in March 1796. 2 days later, he left for war. Italy, the first miracle. The army he inherited was in awful shape. Soldiers in boots so worn through you could see their feet. Half-starved men, not enough horses. The officers who met him expected a bureaucrat from Paris. They got a small man, 5'6", with dark eyes who looked at them like he'd already decided what each of them was worth. At his first meeting, he told them something like this: "You're hungry. Your boots are falling apart. You've been fighting for 2 years and taken nothing. I'm going to give you the richest country in the world. It's right over those mountains. Let's get to work. No speeches about liberty or the Republic. Just food, boots, and rewards." Soldiers understood that language just fine. In 12 months, he smashed the Austrians in a series of lightning strikes across northern Italy, captured Lombardy, and dictated peace terms to Vienna. His tactics were simple to describe and nearly impossible to execute. Move faster than the enemy expects, hit them where they're weakest, split their forces apart, destroy them piece by piece. His men marched 25 miles a day. His generals said it was physically impossible. Then they did it. Napoleon himself slept 4 hours a night. He worked through the night, dictating orders, studying maps, reading intelligence reports. Secretaries collapsed from exhaustion. He replaced them and kept moving. When he returned to Paris at the end of 1797, his name was known across all of Europe. Portraits were sold on street corners. Poets wrote odes. He was 28 years old and the most famous person in the country. That was a problem. Egypt, the gamble. The people in charge of France were scared of Napoleon. He was too popular, too smart, too obviously better than everyone around him. So someone came up with a brilliant move: send him to Egypt. The pitch was, defeat the Mamluks, take Cairo, threaten British India, dominate the Mediterranean. Sounds great. More importantly, he'd be far from Paris. Maybe he'd even stay there. He agreed. But he brought more than an army. He brought 150 scientists, physicists, botanists, artists, linguists. He was going to fight and study at the same time. The result was a monumental work on Egypt that became one of the greatest scientific achievements of the era. And it was his soldiers who found the Rosetta Stone, the key that eventually unlocked the ancient Egyptian writing system. Before the Battle of the Pyramids, he told his troops, "Soldiers, from the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." Great line. Though at that exact moment, he was almost certainly thinking about logistics. Militarily, it all fell apart. The British Navy destroyed the French fleet right in the harbor. The push into Syria failed. Plague tore through his army. And then Napoleon did something that is genuinely indefensible by any military or moral standard. He abandoned his army, handed command to another general, boarded a ship, and sailed home. Just left. But he'd timed it perfectly. France was in crisis. The government was rotting. The country needed someone, and he was on his way. The coup. Almost a disaster. November 9th, 1799. The coup. Everything was in place. His brother was on the inside. The right people had been paid off or scared off. The army was with him. On paper, perfect. But when Napoleon walked into the chamber and started speaking to the deputies, something broke. This man who had commanded thousands under fire suddenly fell apart in front of a room of shouting politicians. His voice shook. His words got tangled. Someone screamed, "Outlaw him!" and he went pale. Then his soldiers walked in and physically threw everyone out. By evening, a new government was announced. Napoleon Bonaparte was first consul of France. The revolution was over. He was 30 years old. The builder. Here's something most people don't know about Napoleon. When he wasn't at war, he was building. And what he built may matter more than any battle he ever won. The Napoleonic Code, the legal framework he wrote in 3 years, is the foundation of law in 40 countries right now, today, as you're reading this. France, Belgium, Spain, Quebec, Louisiana. His logic runs through all of them. Equality before the law, property rights, civil marriage, freedom of religion. The Bank of France, him. The lycée school system, him. State auditing, him. The standardization of the metric system, under him. He worked from 7 in the morning until midnight. He ate in 20 minutes, standing up if the conversation was important enough. He saw up to 50 people a day. Ministers were afraid to be late. He'd start without them. "The code is worth more than all my victories," he said later. That was true, and he said it too late. The Crown. December 2nd, 1804. Notre Dame Cathedral, Paris. The Pope came from Rome in person to crown the new emperor of the French. That alone was a triumph almost too large to describe. The head of the Catholic Church, whose predecessors had crowned kings for 1,000 years, traveled to put a crown on the head of a Corsican lawyer's son. But at the moment when the Pope reached out for the crown, Napoleon quietly, almost gently, took it himself and placed it on his own head. No intermediary, no one in between. The Pope sat in silence. What else could he do? The painter David captured the scene on an enormous canvas. Napoleon later asked him to make one change. His mother, Letizia, should be shown sitting in the front row. In reality, she wasn't there. She'd had an argument with Josephine and refused to come. But for the painting, for history, he wanted her there. That small request says more about him than most biographies. Austerlitz, the perfect trap. December 1805. Facing him, Russian and Austrian armies combined. More men than him, better ground than him, every advantage on their side. A week before the battle, Napoleon deliberately weakened his own right flank, made it look vulnerable, exposed enough that the enemy would see it and take the bait. They took the bait, shifted forces to attack the right flank. Their center thinned out. Napoleon hit the center. The whole thing was a trap he'd been setting for 7 days. That morning, riding along his lines, he told one of his marshals, "If they do what I think they'll do, this battle will be won by 3 o'clock. By 3 o'clock, it was won. The Austrian emperor requested a meeting. The Russian Tsar wept alone in a field. That night, Napoleon rode across the battlefield nearly alone in the dark. He looked at the dead. He didn't look away. These were his soldiers. He'd ordered them forward, and he owed it to them to see the result. "The saddest sight I know," he said later, "is a battlefield the morning after." He didn't stop. The peak and the first crack. Between 1805 and 1807, he defeated Austria, Prussia, and Russia one after another. He redrew the map of Europe. He handed out kingdoms to his brothers like party favors. Joseph got Spain, Louis got Holland, Jerome got Westphalia. A family business on a continental scale. In 1809, he divorced Josephine. She couldn't give him an heir, and an heir wasn't vanity. It was logic. Power without a successor doesn't hold. When he told her, they both cried. That was one of maybe 3 or 4 times in his adult life that Napoleon cried. His new wife was the daughter of the Austrian emperor, the same man he'd beaten on the battlefield 3 times. That's politics. In 1811, she gave him a son. Napoleon took the baby and held him for a long time without speaking. People who were there said he looked different from usual, almost lost, almost just a person. Russia. This is where it ends. There's a moment when a person starts to believe they're smarter than reality itself. In the summer of 1812, Napoleon marched into Russia with nearly 600,000 men, the largest army Europe had ever seen. His plan: the Russians would stand and fight near the border, lose, and ask for terms. That's what had worked in Austria, in Prussia, in Italy, every time. The Russians didn't stand and fight. They retreated, and they burned everything behind them. Villages, supply depots, bridges, fields. The army pushed deeper into a scorched wasteland, losing men not to combat, but to heat, thirst, starvation, and disease. The one major battle, Borodino, gave him the field, but not the victory. The Russian army pulled back intact. Moscow was empty when he arrived, and burning. He stood at the edge of the city and waited for a delegation with the keys, the formal surrender, the way it always worked. No delegation came. The city burned for days. Then autumn arrived, then the cold. He waited for a reply to his peace offer. No reply came. In October, retreat. Of the 600,000 who entered Russia, roughly 100,000 made it back. The rest are in Russian soil, along the road from Moscow to the border. He raced back to Paris in a sleigh, alone, in disguise. Had to build a new army. Had to hold on to power. Had to think fast. But something had shifted. The people who had looked at him like a god in 1804 now looked at him differently, not with hatred, just differently. The fall. 4 countries at once: Austria, Prussia, Russia, Sweden. The Battle of Leipzig. 4 days, 500,000 men on both sides. He lost, for real, for the first time. In March 1814, the Allies entered Paris. His marshals demanded he abdicate. He held out for 2 days. Then he looked at their faces and understood. They'd already made their decision. They were standing next to him in body, but they'd been gone for a while. He signed the abdication. He was 44 years old. That night, he tried to poison himself. He'd been carrying a capsule since Egypt, kept for exactly this situation. But the poison had degraded over the years, several hours on the edge. Then his body rejected it, and by morning, he was alive. The doctor wrote in his notes, "Condition serious, but not life-threatening." Napoleon got up, washed his face, asked for breakfast. He was sent to the island of Elba in the Mediterranean. 6,000 inhabitants, 1,000 guards, a small fleet. He ruled that tiny place with the same focus he'd brought to the empire. Reformed the mines, built roads, wrote laws. He simply didn't know another way to exist. And he listened to the news from the mainland. The 100 Days, One Last Bet. March 1st, 1815. He landed on the southern coast of France with 1,000 men. A royal regiment marched out to stop him. When they met, Napoleon walked out alone in front of his men, took off his hat, and called out, "Soldiers, if there is any man here who wants to shoot his emperor, here I am." Long pause. Then shouts of, "Long live the emperor!" and the regiment switched sides on the spot. That happened everywhere along the road to Paris. Units went over one by one. The marshal the king sent to bring Napoleon back in an iron cage showed up with his entire corps and handed them to Napoleon. On March 20th, Napoleon entered Paris. The king fled. The 100 days began. He knew time was short. He knew Europe wouldn't accept him back. He may have known it was over, but he didn't know how to stand still. Waterloo, June 18th, 1815. It had rained the night before. The ground was soft. The cannons kept sinking in the mud. He delayed the start of the battle by a few hours. Those hours may have been the difference. The enemy received reinforcements in time. The Imperial Guard went in for the final assault and didn't break through. By evening, it was finished. A rock in the middle of the ocean. St. Helena is a speck of volcanic rock in the South Atlantic, 2,000 kilometers from the nearest coast. No further place existed on Earth. That was the point. He lived there for 6 years. The climate was damp and unhealthy. The British governor of the island was a petty, suspicious man who saw a threat in every movement. Napoleon despised him completely. That particular type of person, small and spiteful, was the one kind he truly couldn't stand. But he didn't sit idle. He dictated. For hours, days, weeks, memoirs of every campaign, commentaries on every battle. He was rewriting history, not with crude lies, but cleverly, placing the emphasis exactly where he needed it, building the legend. Napoleon as defender of the revolution. Napoleon as the man Europe wouldn't let have peace. Napoleon as someone who was betrayed. He once told his secretary, "What is history? It's a set of lies that everyone agrees on." He said it, and immediately got back to writing his version. He died on May 5th, 1821. He was 51, the same disease that killed his father, stomach cancer. Though 20th century analysis of his hair showed extremely high levels of arsenic. Whether he was poisoned remains unknown. His last words vary by account. One version, France, Army, the Vanguard. Another, just a name, Josephine. Epilogue, what was left. In 1840, 19 years after his death, his remains were brought back to France. The streets of Paris were packed. People wept. An entire generation had grown up knowing only the legend, never the man. They wept anyway. Here's what he left behind. The Napoleonic Code is the foundation of law in 40 countries right now, as you read this. The lycée school system he created still runs in France today. The Bank of France, him. The metric system, standardized under him. And alongside that, somewhere between 3 and 5 million dead in the wars he started. How do you square those two things? Maybe you don't. Maybe that's just the truth of what happens when a very intelligent, very hungry, very fast-moving man gets more power than anything can contain. No fear, no doubt, no sense that the world might be larger than one person, no matter how extraordinary that person is. He stood on a beach as a child and stared at the horizon. He reached it, found another one behind it, kept going, and the next, and the one after that, until the very end. Power is my mistress. I have worked too hard to win her, to allow anyone to take her away. Napoleon Bonaparte.